Why Friends feels frozen in time. From the very beginning. From the moment Friends begins, something feels strangely suspended. The characters live in New York. Time is clearly passing, and life keeps throwing situations at them, yet nothing ever fully moves forward. That feeling isn't accidental. Friends treats time like a gentle breeze instead of a force. It's there, but it never pushes hard enough to change anyone. The apartments stay familiar. Central Perk never really evolves. Even fashion changes without altering the people underneath. Ross begins insecure and anxious. Monica begins controlling. Chandler begins emotionally guarded. Rachel begins lost, and Joey begins simple. These traits don't feel like starting points. They feel like permanent settings. The show doesn't frame adulthood as a journey toward maturity. It frames it as a shared pause, where everyone is waiting together. When emotional moments threaten to become permanent, a joke quickly steps in to soften them. Serious conversations rarely linger long enough to reshape behavior. Even years passing doesn't create visible evolution. The group dynamic stays intact, untouched by time. Friends isn't about watching people grow up. It's about watching people remain recognizable. That's why the show feels instantly comfortable even early on. You don't need to learn who these characters are because they aren't changing. The frozen feeling becomes reassuring. Nothing is slipping away. You aren't behind. Life isn't demanding transformation. Friends offers a fantasy where adulthood doesn't require reinvention, only companionship. By refusing to let time reshape its characters, the show creates a timeless bubble. Inside that bubble, growth is optional, familiarity is rewarded, and staying the same feels like success rather than failure. This suspension is the show's quiet superpower, turning stagnation into safety, repetition into ritual, and emotional stillness into something audiences return to again and again. It teaches viewers that comfort can matter more than momentum, that stability can feel heroic, and that being surrounded by familiar people may be the closest thing television offers to emotional rest in a noisy, demanding world that rarely allows anyone to pause without guilt or fear of falling behind others. The comfort contract. What the show promises the audience. Friends makes an unspoken promise to its audience, and that promise quietly shapes everything that follows. No matter what happens in an episode, the characters you return to next time will feel the same. This is the show's real contract. You don't watch Friends to discover who these people become. You watch it to reconnect with who they already are. The show understands that comfort comes from predictability. Chandler will joke when things get uncomfortable. Monica will obsess when control slips away. Joey will misunderstand something obvious. Ross will overthink every emotion. Rachel will hesitate at the edge of change. The audience is never punished for expecting this. Instead, that expectation is rewarded again and again. This makes Friends incredibly easy to return to. You don't need emotional preparation. You don't need context. You can jump into almost any episode and feel grounded within minutes. Nothing essential has shifted. That stability is intentional. Friends removes the anxiety of progress, the fear that you've missed something important. In real life, people grow apart. Priorities change. Personalities evolve in ways that can feel uncomfortable or even painful. Friends offers the opposite fantasy. Here, people stay emotionally aligned. They don't outgrow one another. They don't drift into separate worlds. Even when they talk about change, they eventually circle back to the same emotional center. The show fiercely protects this contract because breaking it would cost comfort. If characters truly evolved, the audience would have to adjust. Relationships would feel different. The rhythm would change. Friends refuses to ask that of its viewers. Instead, it offers reassurance. You can come back at any time, after a long day or a long year, and everything will feel familiar. That sense of emotional safety is powerful. It turns the show into a refuge rather than a challenge. Friends doesn't demand growth from its characters, and it doesn't demand it from its audience either. It simply invites everyone to stay exactly where they are, a little while longer. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you're enjoying this content so far, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch these videos without subscribing. Imagine what we could accomplish if everyone subscribed. We all thank you for your continued support. Characters who almost change, and then don't. Friends is very skilled at creating the illusion of change. Episodes often build toward moments that feel meaningful and serious. A character realizes something painful about themselves. Someone admits a long-buried fear they've been avoiding for years. There's a pause, a softer tone, a sense that this moment might finally matter. And then the moment passes. By the next episode, things are subtly back to normal. The behavior returns, the patterns repeat, the lesson fades into the background. This isn't sloppy writing or forgetfulness. It's deliberate control. Friends allows its characters to approach growth without ever crossing into it. These almost changes work like emotional release valves. They let pressure escape without breaking the system. The audience gets the satisfaction of insight without paying the price of transformation. Characters are allowed to recognize their flaws, but they are never required to follow through in a lasting way. Over time, this pattern becomes familiar. Tension builds. A realization appears. Then everything resets. Instead of feeling frustrated, viewers come to expect it. The reset itself becomes comforting. It signals that nothing essential has been disturbed or permanently altered. Growth in Friends is treated as temporary, like a mood rather than a direction. Characters sound reflective for an episode, then return to form. Self-awareness becomes decoration instead of a catalyst. It adds depth without forcing change. This approach keeps the group perfectly balanced. Nobody outpaces anyone else. Nobody evolves into someone incompatible with the group dynamic. The show avoids the danger of uneven development by making sure no development truly sticks. As a result, the emotional landscape stays consistent. You can watch characters confront the same insecurities again and again without permanent consequences. Friends doesn't deny that people struggle. It simply refuses to let struggle reshape the story. The illusion of progress makes the show feel emotionally rich and thoughtful, while the lack of real change preserves the stability that keeps viewers returning, relaxed, reassured, and ready to start the cycle all over again. Chandler's self-awareness that never becomes self-improvement. Chandler Bing understands himself better than almost anyone on the show. He knows he uses humor to hide discomfort. He knows he fears intimacy. He knows his childhood left scars, and he tells you all of this constantly, usually wrapped inside a joke. In most stories, this level of self-awareness would signal the beginning of growth. In Friends, it signals the end of the discussion. Chandler's insight replaces change instead of leading to it. Because he can explain his problems, the show treats them as manageable. The audience laughs, relates, and moves on. Humor becomes emotional insulation. It keeps Chandler from sitting in discomfort long enough to be transformed by it. Every time he gets close to real vulnerability, a punchline interrupts the moment. That interruption matters. It freezes him in place, locking his personality into something safe, familiar, and endlessly repeatable. Real improvement would require sustained effort and uncomfortable silence. It would require Chandler to stop joking and actually sit with fear. Friends doesn't want that. The show needs Chandler to remain the same emotional shape because that shape fits perfectly into the group. Chandler becomes proof that understanding your flaws doesn't mean you have to fix them. Friends validates emotional awareness without demanding action. This makes Chandler deeply relatable. Many people recognize their issues, name them clearly, and then live alongside them unchanged. The show normalizes that experience. Chandler's jokes turn pain into entertainment, and Friends rewards him for it. He remains lovable without evolving. His self-awareness reassures the audience that he's emotionally intelligent, even as his behavior stays largely the same. Growth isn't the goal. Stability is. Chandler doesn't improve because he doesn't need to. He only needs to remain recognizable, predictable, and emotionally intact, serving as a reminder that in this world, insight can replace progress, and staying the same is not failure but comfort. It explains why audiences return endlessly, finding relief in Chandler's jokes, because they promise familiarity, emotional safety, and a world where personal change is optional, delayed, or politely ignored forever there. Joey as the ultimate proof that growth is optional. Joey Tribbiani is the clearest statement Friends ever makes about growth. He doesn't have an arc, he doesn't evolve, he doesn't slowly become wiser or more self-aware. From beginning to end, Joey is essentially the same person, and the show treats that as a strength, not a flaw. Joey is kind, loyal, emotionally honest, and famously simple. He doesn't overthink life, he doesn't analyze himself. He lives in the moment, responding to what's directly in front of him. While other characters flirt with development and then retreat, Joey never pretends to change. He doesn't promise growth, and he never hints at becoming someone else. Because of that, he becomes the emotional anchor of the group. Whenever things get too complicated or heavy, Joey pulls the story back to basics. Food matters. Friendship matters. Loyalty matters. That's it. No inner monologues, no long-term plans, just presence. His simplicity resets the tone whenever the show drifts too close to introspection. Joey's lack of growth reassures the audience that improvement is not required for belonging. He is loved exactly as he is, without conditions. The show never pressures him to become smarter, more mature, or more reflective. No one demands that he change to earn respect or affection. In most narratives, a character like Joey would be forced to evolve or punished for refusing to do so. Friends does the opposite. It protects him. Joey represents a fantasy where staying the same is not failure. It's stability, it's reliability, it's emotional safety. That idea is deeply comforting, especially in a culture obsessed with progress, ambition, and constant self-upgrading. Joey proves that you don't need transformation to matter. You don't need an arc to be valued. You don't need growth to justify your place. You just need to show up, be loyal, and care about the people around you. Friends quietly tells the audience that this too is enough, and that sometimes the most radical thing a character can do is remain exactly who they've always been, without apology or explanation. Why big life events barely leave a mark? Friends includes many moments that should permanently change people. Divorces, marriages, pregnancies, career disasters, and emotional betrayals all appear across the series. Yet none of them truly reshape the characters. These events happen, emotions peak, and then everything quietly settles back into place. Friends reframes life events as temporary disruptions rather than defining moments. They exist to create short-term drama, not long-term identity shifts. Marriage doesn't suddenly make someone mature. Divorce doesn't permanently harden anyone. Even heartbreak fades faster than it should. Parenthood arrives late and is carefully managed to avoid disrupting the group too much. Babies exist, but the emotional center of the show does not move with them. Careers rise and fall, yet personalities remain fixed. Nothing is allowed to permanently tilt the balance. The show understands that real change would force structural evolution. New priorities would emerge. Old habits would fade. Relationships would feel different in ways that could no longer be played for comfort. Friends avoids that risk by softening every aftermath. The characters experience life, but life never redefines them. They pass through milestones without being reshaped by them. For viewers, this is deeply reassuring. It suggests that even when big things happen, you don't have to lose yourself in the process. Friends turns adulthood into something survivable rather than transformative. Growing older doesn't require becoming someone new. You can move forward without shedding your core identity. The message is subtle but powerful, especially when repeated over many seasons. You can pass through major milestones and remain emotionally intact. You don't need reinvention to keep going. You don't need permanent lessons carved into your personality. The show isn't interested in who these characters become because of life. It's interested in preserving who they already are despite it. That preservation keeps the world familiar, stable, and comforting, offering viewers a space where change never demands sacrifice. And continuity feels like safety rather than stagnation, especially in a world that constantly insists growth must hurt to matter. How Friends treats consequences like temporary weather. In Friends, consequences behave like weather patterns. They arrive suddenly, cause discomfort, and then pass without changing the landscape. A character makes a mistake. Feelings get hurt. Tension rises. Then apologies happen, jokes land, and everything clears. Nothing permanent is ever lost. No mistake costs too much. No decision reshapes a life. This keeps the emotional stakes low and safe. You're never afraid that someone's world will truly collapse. That safety matters. It allows the characters to behave badly without becoming unlikable or irredeemable. Consequences exist only to fuel an episode, not to reshape the future. Friends isn't interested in punishment or lasting fallout. It's interested in restoring balance. Every conflict is contained. Every argument has an expiration date. Every emotional wound heals quickly, often within minutes. This creates a world where growth is unnecessary. If actions don't permanently matter, then improvement becomes optional. Characters live inside a loop where lessons fade as soon as they are learned. Today's mistake rarely affects tomorrow's behavior. That loop is comforting. It removes anxiety. You don't brace yourself for long-term damage. You don't worry about emotional scars carrying over. You just enjoy the ride, knowing the destination never truly changes. Friends doesn't deny that people mess up. Characters lie, hurt each other, act selfishly, and make poor decisions. But the show refuses to let those mistakes define them. Nothing sticks long enough to become identity. This refusal is central to why Friends feels so gentle. It's forgiving by design. The world absorbs mistakes instead of amplifying them. Emotional consequences dissolve before they can harden into regret. That gentleness makes the show endlessly watchable. You return knowing the characters will be okay. You trust that harmony will be restored. Friends offers a universe where failure is temporary, forgiveness is guaranteed, and stability always wins, turning consequence itself into just another passing cloud that never blocks the emotional sun for long. Why growth only appears when the end is near. For most of its run, Friends avoids real growth. Then suddenly, near the end, it allows it. Careers stabilize, relationships solidify, life finally moves forward. This shift feels emotional because it's been delayed for so long. Growth is saved for the ending because it's no longer dangerous. At that point, it can't disrupt the comfort contract. The audience has already received years of familiarity. Letting the characters evolve now feels like closure rather than change. Friends treats growth as a farewell gift, not a narrative engine. It allows progress only when the story is done using stability. The characters don't grow during the journey. They grow after the journey ends. That timing is intentional. It preserves everything the audience loved while still offering emotional resolution. Friends doesn't reject growth. It postpones it until it's safe. This delayed payoff reframes the entire series in hindsight. What once felt like stagnation suddenly reads as restraint. The show spent years protecting familiarity, refusing to let momentum break the emotional shape viewers depended on. By holding growth back, Friends made sure that nothing precious was lost along the way. When change finally arrives, it lands softly, almost politely, like the show is asking permission to move on. The characters don't transform dramatically. They simply step forward enough to signal completion. That restraint is why the ending feels earned instead of disruptive. Viewers aren't forced to relearn anyone. They are gently guided toward goodbye. Growth becomes an emotional punctuation mark rather than a plot twist. Friends understood that its power came from repetition, not reinvention. Saving evolution for the final moments protected that power. It allowed the series to end without betraying its identity. In doing so, Friends turns change into closure, progress into release, and maturity into something that arrives only when the audience is ready to let go, leaving comfort intact, even as the story closes its doors behind them quietly, confidently, and without regret. This choice explains why the finale feels safe, gentle, inevitable, and emotionally complete rather than abrupt or shocking. Why this made Friends more comforting than its rivals. Many sitcoms chase realism, growth, and long-term consequences. Friends chased reassurance instead. That single choice explains almost everything about its lasting appeal. By refusing to let its characters fundamentally change, Friends created a world viewers could always return to without effort or emotional adjustment. You never had to fear emotional whiplash. Characters didn't suddenly evolve into strangers. You never had to mourn earlier versions of them or feel nostalgic for a phase that was gone forever. Familiarity stayed intact, season after season. The show protected that familiarity like something fragile and valuable. Friends didn't succeed despite avoiding growth. It succeeded because of it. While other shows asked viewers to track development, adapt to shifting dynamics, and process long-term consequences, Friends asked for something simpler. Come back, sit down. Everything will feel the same. That sameness became its strength. In a culture obsessed with self-improvement, ambition, and constant reinvention, Friends offered something quietly radical: stability, togetherness, the reassurance that you don't always need to be moving forward to be okay. The show suggested that life doesn't have to be a relentless climb. You can pause, you can circle, you can stay with the same people and find meaning there. Friends framed stagnation not as failure, but as comfort, as belonging. That's why the show works just as well decades later. The world outside changes rapidly. Expectations increase. Pressure builds. Friends remains unchanged, offering the same emotional temperature it always did. It doesn't challenge the viewer, it shelters them. It doesn't demand growth, it validates stillness. In doing so, Friends became more than a sitcom. It became emotional furniture. Something familiar you return to when everything else feels unstable. By choosing reassurance over realism, Friends built a timeless refuge. A place where people don't outgrow each other, where mistakes don't define you, and where staying the same isn't a weakness. It's the point. Why Friends refuses to let the group dynamic ever break. One of the strongest forces in Friends isn't romance, careers, or personal ambition. It's the group itself. From the very beginning, the show treats the six friends as a fixed emotional unit that must never truly fracture. Individual storylines are allowed to bend, stretch, and wobble, but the group dynamic is sacred. Every major decision, conflict, or life event is quietly filtered through one question: does this threaten the group? If the answer is yes, the story pulls back. This is why breakups never fully exile anyone. Fights cool down quickly. Even betrayals are softened with jokes, time, and shared space. Friends understands that the real appeal of the show isn't watching six separate lives unfold independently. It's watching the same six people exist together, again and again, in the same emotional formation. The group isn't a backdrop, it's the product. Other sitcoms allow dynamics to shift permanently. Characters drift apart, new alliances form, old ones dissolve. Friends refuses that instability. Relationships inside the group may strain, but the shape always returns. No one is permanently pushed out. No one is replaced. The circle stays closed. That refusal creates an enormous sense of safety. Viewers know that no matter how tense things get, the group will survive intact. You're never watching to see if the friendships will last. You're watching to see how they'll briefly bend before snapping back into place. Even major milestones are designed to protect the group. Jobs don't pull people away for long. Romantic partners outside the circle are framed as temporary disruptions rather than permanent shifts. Whenever someone seems close to leaving, the story gently redirects them back. Friends treats the group dynamic like gravity, Everything can move, but only within a fixed orbit. That choice limits realism, but it maximizes comfort. The show isn't about change disrupting friendship. It's about friendship resisting change. By refusing to let the group ever truly break, Friends delivers its deepest promise. No matter what happens, these people will still be here, together, unchanged, waiting for you exactly where you left them. Friends isn't about watching people become better versions of themselves. It's about watching them stay together, exactly as they are. By delaying growth, softening consequences, and protecting familiarity, the show turned emotional stillness into comfort. Nothing changes, and that's why it still works. If you enjoyed watching, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and drop us a note in the comments letting us know what you want to see us do next.